a bit about the grant process. We did that a lot last week, but we're especially going to talk about applying. Now, I'm not going to give you directions on how to apply for any particular grant. Every grant will have its own application procedure. So it's impossible for me to give you a generic description of how to apply for grant that would really be useful and relevant. The answer to what's it like to apply for a grant is it depends. What I can do is tell you how to read and interpret the really important parts of an RFA. An RFA is a request for application. These are the instructions for applying for a grant. If you buy a new product and you have to assemble it, what's the first thing you're supposed to do? You're supposed to read the assembly instructions, right? And sure, I know a lot of us don't do that, but then you end up having to go back and read the instructions, and it takes longer than if you had read the instructions in the first place. The same is true with grants. You need to read, understand, and follow the application instructions very carefully for several reasons. It will tell you whether or not your farm is eligible, whether you will meet their funding priorities. If you want to apply for money for a project for which you are not eligible, you're going to be wasting your time because you will not get a grant. So you want to be able to eliminate grant programs for which you are not eligible right off the bat. It will tell you about the program's cost sharing or financial matching requirements. A grant will not pay for 100% of a project. It will tell you how much money you are required to put up to match the grant. And it will also tell you what the grant ceiling is, the total amount of money that can be requested. It's important to know because if you can't come up with the matching funds, there really is no point in applying for the grant. It'll tell you what has to be in the application. What are the different sections? What kind of information needs to be in each section? And it will tell you how a grant has to be submitted and when it has to be submitted. For example, it'll tell you need to submit the grant using our online portal, or you have to send it to us via email, or you can drop it off by our economic development office or something like that. It'll tell you about any supporting documentation that is required. For example, if you want to build a new structure, you may have to provide blueprints. You may have to provide financial information that attests to your ability to raise additional funds. You may be asked to provide a resume. You may have to provide financial statements or virtually anything. I had to, for example, for the grant that I submitted so I could host this program at no cost, I had to provide survey results that showed that, yes, there are sufficient number of people who are interested in getting farm grants, and that helped me get the money. All of this kind of additional documentation that is needed or recommended, and if it says it's recommended, understand that you really kind of need to do it, will be listed. It will give you deadlines. Deadlines are hard deadlines in a grant. If your grant is submitted even 1 second late, it won't be accepted. So you have to know when things are due. It will describe how your grant will be evaluated relative to the other grants that were submitted. And this is very useful to know because it helps you craft your grant in a way that makes it more competitive and thus more likely to be funded. And it will tell you how and when you will be notified about your success, whether you will be getting a grant or whether you won't be getting a grant. So this is all useful information. Seeking, receiving, and managing a grant is a multi-step process, and it usually will unfold over several years. It includes the process of actually completing the project that you are proposing. The first step will probably be an announcement of an upcoming grant opportunity. We said these are FOAs or NOFA if it's a state grant. Basically, this is like an ad for the grant program. It's like a heads up saying, hey, next month, we're going to be offering this grant. And if you're signed up in those portals that we talked about last week, you will get advance notice, which is very useful. Then a request for grant applications will be issued. Sometimes these will be called request for proposals or RFPs. Understand that an RFA and an RFP are virtually the same thing. RFP is a bit of an old-fashioned term, but it might still be used. Typically, these days, it is a request for an application. So this is when the grant opportunity opens and the instructions for applying for a grant are issued. Occasionally, the grant agency will hold an informational meeting before applications are due. Sometimes it'll take place before the RFA is actually issued. For example, NRMI, which is Northeast Risk Management Education Center, which is the organization that funded this program, had kind of an informational session that all new applicants had to attend. For past applicants, it was optional, but I still sat in on it. And what it does is it really introduces the grant. It talks a little bit about it. It talks about the application procedure, about eligibility, about deadlines and things like that. And they're doing that to increase the likelihood people will be able to determine whether it's a good fit for their particular organization and their project before they actually start to prepare a grant process. It's good on both sides. So the agency won't get a lot of bad grants they have to read through, and the applicant won't have to spend a lot of time and effort writing a grant application that isn't going to be funded. If there is sort of a pre-application meeting of some sort, plan on attending. Usually they're short, they're maybe an hour. They're always webinars. Sometimes they're recorded, sometimes they're not. But I have to believe you get brownie points for attending. And that's why even if I don't have to attend, I always do. It doesn't hurt, and it might be worth a lot of money. So why not do it? Then you will prepare your grant application. You will submit it, right? And you'll submit it in however the agency tells you to do it. The agency will then evaluate all of the grant applications it's received using the process it's outlined. Usually this will take a number of months, a few months anyway. You can plan on that. For example, for the NRMI program, I submitted it in early November, and the awards are announced in mid-February, so about 4 months, but we have holidays in there too. So the awards will be announced at that point. You will get a message saying, hey, your grant was funded. We're looking forward to working with you. Or you might get an email that says, sorry, your grant application was not funded, which means better luck next time, basically. Then if your grant application is not funded, the process stops there. You can reapply next year or whenever the grant is offered again. If your grant is funded, you will continue to move through this process. There might be pre-funding meetings. For example, I had to go to Philadelphia for a one-day workshop, which basically taught me how to manage this particular grant. If this is kind of a meeting will be required, it will be mentioned in the application process, and you should put travel cost into your application so you don't have to pay for it out of pocket. I didn't do that last year, so my team had to pick up the cost. Fortunately, it was only one day and I could drive there, so it wasn't too much. This year, it's much more expensive because it's in a distant location and it's an expensive city. So you better believe I built a lot of money into my grant application for this year to cover those travel costs. I've learned my lesson. And frankly, funders expect that. Right? Travel is a legitimate expense. And if they're requiring you to go to some sort of a training session or something for the grant, it's perfectly okay to estimate travel expenses and to put that in. They won't pay you for your time. So you can't put sort of an equivalent salary or something in there, but you can put expenses for travel into your budget. The funds will then be distributed. Sadly, I don't get any money. The money all goes to Cornell when I get grant money, and Cornell takes a big cut of it. But for you, the grant money will go to you directly to help fund your project. It may be distributed in increments. That is pretty common. So you might get basically a check or deposit in your bank account every 3 months or something for over the course of the life of your project, whatever you've agreed to do. Now, during this process, you have to manage the grant. And that means you're going to have to give periodic progress reports to the grant agency. This means this is what I've done. Here's some proof of what I've done that demonstrates that, yes, I am indeed using these grant funds to do whatever you've promised to do. So you might have to produce some receipts. You'll have to write a report. For me, it's always been like 1 or 2 pages. The process of award management is really not onerous. Every 3 months, I might spend 2 hours writing a report and submitting it. It does have to be done. And then finally, when your project is completed, you've come to the end of the funding period, you are going to have to prepare a final summary report that basically says, this is my project. Here's what I did. This is how I use the funds. This will be a little bit more detailed. It will take a little more time. And it's not unusual for the funder to provide you with some mandatory forms that you have to use for it. It's a lot like the incremental progress reports that you've already been doing. So I've never found the award process to be really onerous. Most of the work is done up front when you are writing the grant application. That's what really takes a lot of time and planning. Let's talk about the document that tells you how to write your grant application. This is the request for application, and it will describe the application process in great detail. Too much detail very often. And it will tell you a lot of valuable information. Eligibility, what types of programs and projects are eligible for funding. If yours project isn't eligible or your farm isn't eligible for a particular program, it will not get funded, right? So if you're applying for a beginning farmer grant and you are not a beginning farmer, your application won't be funded. It doesn't matter how great the idea is or how much you need the money, you just will not be funded because that's not what this program is for. It's not the agency's priorities in this case. Expectations. The organization will be very specific about what it expects successful applicants to do and what it also expects farms to do during the application process. It's important to know this up front and to make sure you can meet the expectations. These usually are non-negotiable. It'll tell you again about how you submit your application and how it will be reviewed. And it's not unusual for them to actually supply a kind of a rubric saying, okay, this section is worth so many points, this section is worth so many points, and so on. And it's useful looking that rubric or that scorecard over because it can help you put more emphasis on sections that carry more points, if you will. And again, this makes your grant application more competitive. The funding amount, okay, it will tell you the total amount of funds available. For example, it might tell you there are $3 million in total available for this program. And when those funds are dispersed, that's it. The program will be over. Right? It'll tell you what the cost share requirements are, the funding ceilings. In other words, the maximum amount of money that any one applicant can receive, apply for and receive. It may tell you the estimated number of awards or grants available. So if there are $3 million and the maximum ceiling is $500,000, that means potentially the minimum number of awards available is 6. Now, they wouldn't run a program with such a small number of grants, but that's just, I picked that example because the math is easy. Sometimes they will tell you this, but really it depends on how much people ask for. Not everyone asks for the maximum amount of money, and they'll tell you when notified of whether or not your application was successful. There is a problem with RFAs, RFPs. They're not always easy to read and understand. I have found that the RFAs that are from private and local funding agencies are much more understandable and straightforward than federal and state RFAs. Federal and state RFAs use a lot of jargon and terminology that you won't see anywhere else. So if you intend to apply for a federal or state grant, you might budget a little more time to read through the RFA and make sure you understand it. And if some of the terminology is kind of confusing, and I will tell you, they are confusing. I find them confusing. Even experienced grant writers can have a little trouble navigating them. That's a good time to ask for help. Reach out to a county extension agent, to the funding agents, to friends or family members, and ask them to sort of read through it and say, what's your understanding of this? If there's something you don't understand. You can't go wrong by contacting the funding agency. They'll always specify someone that you can reach out to with questions to ask for clarification. It's well worth the phone call. Here is a procedure that, frankly, I use to get through these admittedly dense documents. And they tend to be long, like the RFA for the NERMI grant that I used to get money for this program was about 40-page long, not counting a couple of items in appendices. They didn't have one appendix, they had 2. It's a lot of stuff. So how do you get through all that, especially when it uses a lot of obscure language? Well, first, you would skim through it to make sure you meet all the important eligibility requirements. That means you are eligible, your farm is eligible, and your project is eligible, and you have time to respond. This means you have the time to devote to writing a competitive grant application and gather all of the supplementary information you need to submit it. I've occasionally gotten phone calls from farmers, and they say, wow, there's a great grant, and it's really perfect for the project that I want to undertake on my farm. And, one of my first questions would be, okay, well, when's the deadline? When do you have to have the grant application ready? And it's in 3 or 4 days from when they're calling. My advice will always be, forget it. It's impossible to write a really detailed, competitive grant in such a short space of time. Everybody is different when they do this. Some people write more quickly than others. Some people like to use AI tools like ChatGPT. I don't use that very much because I think it sounds like it was generated by a machine. You can use it if you like. I've never seen a grant application that says you can't use AI. Or you might want to find someone to actually write the grant for you. There are people who will do this for a fee. All of this can't be done in just a few days. And this is why it's very, very important to be proactive and to get advance notice and to already have some project planning done when you have the RFA available. The answers to those questions are yes. If you do meet eligibility requirements and you do have time to respond and write a good grant application, then I would go on to the next step. Reread the RFA, RFP, and this time I would read it more carefully. I would take my time. Make note of important dates, whether these are optional or required. These are things that you want to note if there is a pre-bid meetings. Is there a meeting you need to attend to learn about the grant before you actually submit your proposal? What's the proposal's due date? Are there meetings like principal investigator funding meetings like the one I had to attend in Philadelphia? Are there certain dates that your project has to be started by? Does it have to be, project have to be completed by a certain date? If so, does it coincide with your plans? Is it reasonable? Can you complete the project when you need to for funding purposes? Basically, you want to determine if your project team can meet these deadlines, because often, again, these are non-negotiable. The next thing you want to know is the project descriptions, the summary that you are required to write about your project, what you want the money for, and how you intend to use it. This will describe the work that has to be done in order to complete your farm project. Is your farm capable of completing the work that you basically are promising to do? If, for example, if the work has to be completed by a certain time and you're not sure you can get the necessary labor or parts or funding, then you might want to give it a second thought. And what happens if you don't meet the deadlines or all of the requirements? That would be a question for the representatives at the funding agency. You want to consider matching funds. Do you have the matching funds needed, required by the agency, and needed to complete the project? Or can you get them? And how certain are you that you can get them? I can assure you that the competitiveness of your application will go up a lot if you include a pre-approval letter from a lender, or if you can demonstrate that, yeah, as of maybe the submission date for the application, I have this much money in the bank and it will cover the match that I need to produce. Or, it's in some CDs that I've got right here, and here's the information. This gives you credibility. It makes you seem like a good risk, and that will reflect very favorably on you and your application. Because funders don't want to give grants to farms that aren't going to do what they say they're going to do. I mean, that's a big problem for them. It makes them harder to get money in the future if they do that. Okay, what are the evaluation criteria? Do you think you have a realistic chance at winning an award? Now, fortunately, most funding agencies will provide some additional resources on their websites, provide descriptions of projects that have been funded successfully in the past, with video tutorials, with all kinds of useful educational tools that will give you a good sense of whether or not your project has a good chance of being funded. Before you spend a lot of time and effort writing an application, it would be useful to look at some of those resources and get a sense of just how competitive your project, your application will be. You've done that. What do you do now? If you are eligible, again, you have the time. You want to look at the submission details. Do you have to submit electronically via an online portal? If you're applying for a federal grant or a state grant, this will be the case. Occasionally, a funder may want hard copies by postal mail. That might be the case at a county economic development office or a city economic development office. If that's the case, you want to know, how do I get this paper application in on time? Should I send it certified mail? Should I send it Federal Express? Or can I drop it off or something like that? You want to be sure you budget adequate time, especially if you have to mail something. If you're submitting it via an online portal, it will be sent instantaneously. So you don't need a lot of extra time. You just have to be sure that you are submitting it by the deadline. If you are submitting it online, you want to register with the website and test the online portal before it's time to actually submit the grant. You don't want to get, like 10 minutes away from the final deadline for submission and suddenly get an error message. Gee, you need to change a password, or you've been locked out, or there is a problem or something like that. The people at the funding agency will have to fix that problem. And frankly, they may not be available to do that in short notice. And even if it's not your mistake, it will become your problem because your application will be late and then it won't be accepted. So you want to test out your registration and the function of an online portal before you actually get there. I speak from experience, folks. Don't make my mistakes. Do what I say, not what I used to do. Now I test them out. Proposal formats. Most RFPs outline a very specific format for the applications. They will lay out sections, okay? And in this section, you have to do this, and it has to look like this. The next section, okay, here's where you explain this. Some applications, particularly federal and state grants, will provide a word count. This means there is a limit on the number of words you can use in each section. These word counts are hard and fast. Again, in the NERMI application, I wrote a really beautiful description for the grant application I put in this year. And then I went back and realized, I can only use 400 words. Well, my description was about 6 pages long. So I had to go and I had to cut that down severely. And it would have been better if I had simply written a description of the project that was 600 words long from the start. I would have forced me to be very concise and to use a sharp editorial knife had I done a little bit better job of planning for that. And if you go over the word count, either funders differ on this. Sometimes they will just downgrade you and give you less points. Sometimes they will stop reading when the word count is reached, so they won't read your whole description. And sometimes they can actually not accept your application because you've gone over the word count. And that's because someone who uses more words have an unfair advantage over those who are more concise and follow the rules. And that's not fair. So you will actually be downgraded if you don't follow word count limits. You want to follow the proposal format very precisely if one is provided, and typically they will be. Additional information is required. You want to be sure to include them. Usually there's a section where you can upload supplementary documents. You always do it in PDF form. It's just a lot safer to do it in PDF. Funding agencies typically provide a lot of helpful resources for people who are thinking about applying. This is particularly true of federal and state agencies. Video tutorials will show you how to use the online portals, and they're very useful, especially if you're not very tech savvy like me. It'll often give you descriptions of projects that have been funded and completed in the past, and this will give you a sense of whether your project is eligible and just how competitive it can be. So you might want to check a few of those out. Usually they will not show you the actual applications, but it will give you a brief summary description of the project. Again, there might be some how-to webinars or some general webinars about a grant program that helps you determine eligibility. Often there are fact sheets, which are very useful if you're having a problem or you get stuck. You can just check the facts. There'll be contact information for staff who can answer questions that aren't in the facts. I recommend going to facts first. One very useful feature are checklists for completion. If the application is long and it requires some supplementary information, they will often provide some checklists that basically is a list for the different sections. And you can download that, print it out, and literally have like a checking where you check off, okay, do I have my project summary? Check, that's all done. Did I provide a copy of the specs for the structure I want to build? Check. Did I have a copy of my budget? Check. Do I have a budget narrative, which is a worded description of how you intend to spend the money? Check. And you would just go through and check it off. Very, very useful. I recommend doing it. Finally, most funders will provide accommodation requests for those who need them. Federal and state funding agencies will always do this. Certainly, I would expect that other types of funding agencies, private or local, municipal would as well. So this might be, for example, if you're vision impaired, or you just have you need some accommodation in order to participate in training sessions, or something like this, whatever it might be. You can contact the agency and you can say, I kind of need an accommodation in order to submit my application. How can you help me? And they're very, very willing to do this. They're not going to write your application for you, but they're willing to make it easier for you to write it. So if you require an accommodation of any sort, I suggest contacting the grant agencies directly and talking to them about it. These resources are available. They typically will be. I recommend using them. They can be very helpful. Let's say you've done all that. You've skimmed the RFA. You've reread it. You've decided that it's a great opportunity and you want to apply. What next? How do you get started? Well, the first thing you want to do is discuss the proposal with your farm's team to identify items that make your farm a strong competitor for the grant. Do you have experience, or do you have certain resources on your farm that might be very attractive? Do you fit into eligibility groups that the funder wants to prioritize? If the submission is via an online portal, register your farm with the portal and familiarize yourself with using the portal. If it is a federal funding agency or a state funding agency, you will use an online portal to create and submit your grant application. There are no exceptions to that. You have to register your farm in order to access the portal and write your application. Everything will be done online. So I recommend registering your farm sooner rather than later, and become very familiar with how the portal works, because you're going to be spending some time in that virtual space. Then you want to start outlining your farm's grant application using the required format that is specified in the RFA. As sort of a hint, I like to actually cut and paste the headings in the application. So there might be a project introduction and principal investigator. This is the person who's like in charge of the grant. Okay, they call them principal investigators. And a budget narrative, things like that. I like to copy and cut and paste these and copy them into a Word document. And I actually create the text that goes into each of those sections, under each of those headings, in a Word document. It's very easy to make changes or to update. For example, if you realize, oh, my 6-page description has to be cut down to 600 words, you can do it very quickly and easily if it's in the form of a Word file. Then when you're happy with a completed text that will go into a particular section, you've proofread it, maybe someone else on your farm team has looked it over and made suggestions, and you've sort of improved it. Then take the finished project, cut and paste it into the online portal that you're actually going to use to submit the application. So I like to work kind of offline or outside of the portal in a Word document. The portals tend to be not as user-friendly as a Word document. So that's why I recommend doing the drafts in Words and then just pasting a finished product into the application portal. You're just going to write up your content. If you get stuck on a point, again, get some help to complete it. Go to other folks in your farm team, have them proofread it, talk about things. What kind of features should we have in this project, or what can we do to make this project more attractive? There's absolutely nothing. You don't have to write this by yourself. Family member can write it. A group of people can write it. An employee can write it. Anyone can write it. You want to allow plenty of time for proofreading, for reviewing your application, and for finalizing the proposal. I really recommend proofreading it multiple times. You will find little things you may want to tweak. You may think, okay, maybe the punctuation's a little bit off, or maybe a sentence isn't grammatically correct. But remember, this is a competitive process. If a funder has two great projects and they can only fund one, they're more likely to fund the application that didn't have a lot of errors in it, even if they're small grammatical or punctuation errors, because it really says something about the applicant, right? That they pay attention to detail, they're kind of organized, they like things to look good, to go well. And again, remember, they're taking a risk by giving you money for your grant. They want to make sure that they're taking a good risk, right? And little errors in the application suggest that you may not be a good risk. These are small things, but they make a difference. And of course, send it off by the due date. Here's what we are going to do. I'm going to give you your last assignment. Last time you'll do it from me. I will send you a copy of an actual RFA. What you should do is skim it, read it over. It will be for a program that is expired, all right? Sometimes RFAs continue to live on the internet, so particularly if it is a small, a local, or an RFA issued by a private organization. After you skim the proposal, and I will try to pick one that is very user-friendly and not 40 pages long with 2 appendices, decide if you should apply for this grant and explain why mentally. You don't have to write anything. Just say, what I've done is giving you a few scenarios here. So here's Farm A. It's been using some new tillage practices that it believes help conserve topsoil. Farm operator would like to purchase a new tractor in order to conduct some more formal field trials of their new tillage method. Would this particular grant program be appropriate for funding the purchase of the tractor? You say, yes, it is because, or no, it isn't because. Okay, and again, I just have a couple more scenarios like that. And by the way, these are real scenarios that I know about from the day job here. This is just to give you a little bit of practice in reading and understanding RFAs. And I really thank you all for joining us today.